Okay, we are looking at day one of PFT 118. This is one of my all-time favorite classes, but this is going to be another one of our 12-day classes. So it's one of our, I like to call it our heavy science classes. Like, if you look at the overall PFT schedule, right, it is, if I pull it up here, you've got your mod 1 in the core, you've got your mod 2 in the core, mod 3 and mod 4. Those numbers don't matter. This could be your mod 1, it could be your mod 3, it could be whatever. It just depends on like where you start. But this is kind of the reset here. And all of our mods kind of go in the same order. They all go in the order of like heavy science class in the beginning, right? So in this one, that's going to be anatomy and physiology. In the mod after this, it's going to be kinesiology. In the mod after that, it is going to be fitness assessments. And in the mod after that, it's going to be exercise physiology, which is different from anatomy and physiology. Like anatomy and physiology is meant to be the overall broad science of physiology. And so it covers like a lot of broad information. Exercise physiology is how all of that broad information applies directly to like a workout session. So we spend a lot more time talking about ATP production, whereas in anatomy and physiology, we kind of go through everything. Then we move into our 8-day classes, which are kind of like I call them our soft skill classes, because they're the kind of things that like shade in your personality as a trainer. Like all of them can be important to being a successful trainer, but not necessarily all of them have to be important, like maybe you're a trainer who does talk a lot about nutrition, or maybe you're not, it just depends on like where you find yourself. So these are going to be things like psychology, special populations fitness, sales, and exercise nutrition. So like, in this mod, we're going to have our behavior change specialist certification is going to supply our materials for exercise psychology. And so exercise, this is going to be helping your clients come up with really good habits and SMART goals, and how to use imagery effectively, things like that. Tools that if you're sitting down, it's the stuff that falls outside of the gym floor, and not every trainer is going to do that, but every trainer could do that. So we want to make sure we teach it to you. And then the next one is like special populations. Like how do you work with people who have like cardiovascular disease, or how do you work with people who have peripheral arterial disease or osteoporosis, or maybe a cancer patient, right? Again, not every trainer is going to do that, but you certainly could. Sales. This one is kind of like important for everybody, not because you have to do sales. There's plenty of training scenarios where you will never have to do sales, but the leadership and business part of it is something, you're going to want to know how to write a resume and a cover letter. So we're definitely going to cover that in here. And then nutrition, right? Like not every trainer is going to do nutrition, but we definitely want to kind of teach you how to do nutrition. And then at the end of every module, you are going to end with what we see here, which is our program design classes. So in this one, it's going to be OPT for youth-specific training. So we are looking at how to train youths, right? Then our next module, we'll be looking at how to train seniors. The module after that, we're going to look at how to train athletes. And the module after that, we will look at, the one we just finished, is how to work with clients who are dealing with extreme weight loss. So every one of these program design classes is very handy for teaching you the same information, where it's like, here's the right number of sets to do. If your client is like this, here's the right number of reps. But then we kind of look at it from a different perspective every module. Like this module, we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of like how to write a program that is effective, but also fun and engaging for kids. The next module, when we get to the senior stuff, how to write a program that's effective, but also safe for seniors. The mod after that, how to train an athlete, but how to increase like sports performance. So there's a little bit of a different perspective for each of those program design classes. But that's a general rule of how this always works. And it's always going to follow the same like day schedule. We're going to have a 12-day science class, an 8-day soft skills class, and a 10-day program design class every single mod. So it's always going to go 12, 8, 10, 12, 8, 10. And there's going to be 4 mods here in the core, right? So each of these takes about 6 weeks, because you think about like this is 12 plus 8 plus 10, that's about 30 business days. So, you know, throw weekends, holidays and stuff in there, it's about 6 weeks. So this is about a 6-month journey here in the core. And then we get to capstone. And capstone, I always tell people, and this isn't strictly true, but I always say it this way. Capstone is, you don't learn anything new in capstone. Like the goal is not necessarily to learn new stuff. You should already have a pretty good handle on all of the information necessary to become like a good trainer. But we want to prepare you, we want to over prepare you for how to pass your NASM exam. And that's what the capstone is for. And so this is 2 modules. One of them is the test prep module, where you are going to have NASM CPT exam prep, and that is literally just where we are drilling you and getting you used to taking your NASM exam. Then we're also going to do advanced fitness nutrition, because we want to drill you and get you used to being able to take your NASM FNS certification, or Fitness Nutrition Specialist certification. That is one of the other certifications that comes along with your purchase of the Sochi program, right? You're walking away with a regular NASM CPT, which will get you into any gym, but then you also have like your FNS and your CES, which are 2 sub-certifications that set you apart from any standard trainer. So nutrition is one, and then here we test prep you for NASM's corrective exercise. This is where, when I say you don't learn anything new in capstone, it kind of breaks down, because this is actually a very different style of training. Then we have, so here we're going to prepare you for how to pass your test. And then in the second half of the module, we're going to prepare you for how to work. So I want to get you used to like the idea of like, what do you do when your client shows up late? What do you do if your client comes in complaining of excessive soreness? You know, how do you modify on the fly? How do you write programs and work with the same person consistently? You know, how do you check in and be like, hey, here's what we did last time. How'd that feel? You know, hey, I can't help but notice that you got a little stagnant here. Let's bump the weight a little bit today. You know, little things like that that are going to kind of prepare you for the real world. That's what we call it practicum is for. And so that is going to be from 3 different perspectives as well. The first one being your average everyday client, the second one being an athlete, and the third one being the corrective exercise client. And you can apply nutritional and behavior change concepts to all of them. So that is a rundown. Oh, and each of these are also 6 weeks, because they're both 30 days as well. But this is going to be 6 weeks here and 6 weeks here. So that is a total of your 9-month program. So that is a rundown of the entire Sochi PFT program. Let's go ahead and take a look at this first 12-day course that some of you are going through. So this is going to be 12 days, and the first 6 is like, you know, the first half of class, and the second 6 is the second half of class. So what we're going to do in every Sochi class that you're going to have, you're going to get a piece of homework every other day, because we want to get you into the habit of like regularly studying. You know, it's not meant to be like you have to spend 2 hours every freaking day trying to like, you know, read through your book, and it's like, okay, I got to read this textbook 50 times before the 9 months is over. That's not really what we're going for. But we do want to get you intentional about like studying at regular intervals. And so we're going to give homework out every other day. And the homework will always consist of questions that were created by NASM. And they are all going to be multiple choice, because that is how your exam will be when you go to take your real NASM. It is all multiple choice questions. And you're going to get 15 questions every other day. And those 15 questions are going to cover the last 2 days. So today we're going to be going over our first PowerPoint, which is the organization of the human body. And then tomorrow we'll be going over compounds and cellular biology. Then you're going to get your first piece of homework, and that is going to cover these first 2 PowerPoints. Then we'll go into the skeletal and muscular system. The day after that, we'll go into the nervous and endocrine systems. And then you're going to get your second piece of homework, which will cover those 2 PowerPoints. Now, once you've gotten through 2 pieces of homework in this first 12-day class, we're going to hit the halfway point of this course. And that is when we're going to have a review day, and we're going to do a midterm. And that is meant to be a review of everything we've talked about so far, because this heavy science stuff is heavy and sciencey. So here's the thing about so these, like I said, are 15 multiple choice questions every single time, right? Your midterm will be 30 questions. Now here's the thing, of those 30 questions, 15 of them are going to be familiar to you. And what I mean by that is basically you're going to get half of the questions from homework 1 and half of the questions from homework 2. They're going to show up again in the midterm. And then the other half of that test, the other 15 questions, are all going to be new, but still like in the same realm of everything we talked about. So, you know, you're going to get a question about the nervous system in homework 2. You might get another question in the final that is similar, but just slightly different. You know, it might be like a reworded version or something like that. But here's what I always tell people: if you were to, once you take homework 1 and homework 2, and if you were to literally just memorize them and then take your midterm, you would get a 50% bare minimum, just if you had all the homework questions memorized. So we want to kind of reward you guys for effort in practicing, because, you know, especially like as a trainer, I think this is, you know, I think that this is a great example of like our program kind of reflects the fact that like we are all trainers and we are all used to doing things for repetition and sets and rest periods, you know. This very much feels like almost like an exercise routine. It's like we want you to stagger your workout days, and we want you to do the same amount of stress, and then we want to like apply that in a way that creates growth, you know. So study your homework 1, study your homework 2, and it will help you with your midterm. And then the exact same thing is going to happen for the second half of class. You're going to have day 7 here, which will be our 6th PowerPoint, day 8, which will be our 7th PowerPoint. You'll get your 3rd piece of homework, 15 multiple choice questions. Then you'll have day 9 and day 10. You'll get your 4th piece of homework, which will be covering days 9 and 10. Then we will have day 11 here. And then we will have our review and final exam. And the review and final exam will also be 30 questions, 15 of them familiar, 15 that are new. And those questions are all going to come from the content of days 6 through 10. So you're going to cover basically everything that you saw. And then you'll also notice one other thing. There's always one gap day between when you get your last piece of homework and when you take your tests. And that is just meant to give you time to kind of study those things. So Maggie, I know you've been through this a million times, but you got any questions about any of that? Cool. Moving on. Let's go ahead and dive into our PowerPoint, shall we? So, ooh, good job. All right, putting me up in the corner here. All right, PFT 118, Anatomy and Physiology for fitness. Day 1, actually, we're just going to go PowerPoint 1, Organization of the Human. Make sure I'm doing this right. All zoomed in. There we go. Okay, so looking at this first one, also we are going to be showing a lot of videos in this course, so you know we're going to get copyright stricken real hard by YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with actually a video here that we're going to watch that is one of my all-time favorite videos to watch, called Crash Course Organization. Oh God, there's other organizations now. Physiology organization. There we go. So I don't want to watch their intro video as much as I love it. There we go.
Everybody, I know this is
mute. No ads. Get enough ads in the real world. Skip. All right. So it's kind of a fun little video that we're going to watch. It's going to kind of summarize everything that we're about to go over in this PowerPoint, and then I will go over it in detail after we watch it.
Second, really look at yourself. I'd like you to take a second, really look at yourself. I don't mean take stock of your life, which really isn't any of my business, but I mean just look at your body. Hold up your hand, wiggle it around, take a sip of water, hold your breath, sniff the air. These things are so simple for most of us that we don't give them a moment's thought, but each one of those things is so much more complex than it feels. Every movement you make, every new day that you live to see is the result of a collection of systems working together to function properly. In short, you, my friend, are a magnificent beast. You are more convoluted and prolific and polymorphously awesome than you probably even dare to think. For instance, did you know that if they were all stretched out, your intestines would be about as long as a 3-story building is tall, or that by the time you reach old age, you'll have produced enough saliva to fill more than one swimming pool, or that you lose about 2/3 of a kilogram every year in dead skin cells, and you will lose more than 50 kilograms of them in your lifetime. Just tiny, dried up pieces of you drifting around your house and settling on your bookshelves, feeding entire colonies of dust mites. You're your own little world, and I'm here to help you get to know that world, the body that you call a home, through the twin disciplines of anatomy, the study of the structure and relationships between body parts, and physiology, the science of how those parts come together to function and keep that body alive. Anatomy is all about what your body is. Physiology is about what it does. And together, they comprise the science of us. It's complicated science, I'm not going to lie to you, and it draws on a lot of other disciplines like chemistry and even physics. And you'll have to absorb a lot of new terms, lots of Latin, gobs of Greek. But this course isn't just going to be an inventory of your individual parts or a diagram of how a slice of pizza gives you energy, because these disciplines are really about why you're alive right now and how you came to be alive, how disease harms you, and how your body recovers from illness and injury. It's about the big picture stuff that we either spend most of our time thinking about or trying not to think about. Death and sex and eating and sleeping, and even the act of thinking itself. All processes that we can understand through anatomy and physiology. If you pay attention, and if I do my job well enough, you'll come out of this course with a richer, more complete understanding, not only of how your body works, everything from handshakes to heart attacks, but I think you'll also start to see that you really are more than just the sum of your parts. We've come to understand the living body by studying a lot of dead ones, and for a long time we did this mostly in secret. For centuries, the dissection of human bodies was very taboo in many societies, and as a result, the study of anatomy has followed a long and slow and often creepy road. The 2nd century Greek physician Galen gleaned what he could about the human form by performing vivisections on pigs. Da Vinci poked around in dead bodies while sketching his beautifully detailed anatomical drawings until the Pope made him stop. It wasn't until the 17th and 18th centuries that certified anatomists were allowed to perform tightly regulated human dissections, and they were so popular that they were often public events with admission fees attended by the likes of Michelangelo and Rembrandt. The study of human anatomy became such a craze in Europe that grave robbing became a lucrative, if not legal, occupation until 1832, when Britain passed the Anatomy Act, which provided students with plentiful corpses in the form of executed murderers. Today, students of anatomy and physiology still use educational cadavers to learn in person and hands-on what's inside a human body by dissecting them. And it's totally legal. The cadavers are volunteers, which is what people mean when they say that they're donating their body to science. So what have all these dead bodies shown us? Well, one big idea that we see over and over again is that the function of a cell, organ, or a whole organism always reflects its form. Blood flows in one direction through your heart simply because its valves prevent it from flowing backward. In the same way, your bones are strong and hard, and this allows them to protect and support all your soft parts. The basic idea that what a structure can do depends on its specific form is called the complementarity of structure and function. And it holds true through every level of your body's organization, from cell to tissue to system. And it all begins with the smallest of the small, atoms. Just like the chair you're sitting on, you are just a conglomeration of atoms, about 7 octillion of them to be precise. Fortunately for both of us here, we've covered the basics of chemistry that every incoming physiology student needs to know in Crash Course Chemistry, so I'll be referring you there throughout the course when it comes to how things work at the atomic level. So the next level up from the chemistry of atoms and molecules includes the smallest units of living things, cells. All cells have some basic functions in common, but they also vary widely in size and shape depending on their purpose. For example, one of the smallest cells in your body is the red blood cell, which measures about 5 micrometers across. Now contrast that with the single motor neuron that runs the length of your entire leg from your big toe to the bottom of your spine, about a meter from end to end. Typically, cells group with similar cells to form the next level of organization. Tissues like muscles, membranes and cavity linings, nervous and connective tissues. When two or more tissue types combine, they form organs. The heart, liver, lungs, skin, etc. that perform specific functions to keep the body running. Organs work together and combine to get things done, forming organ systems. It's how, like, the liver and stomach and intestines of your digestive system all unite to take that burrito from plate to pooper. And finally, all those previous levels combine to form the highest level of organization, the body itself. Me and you and your dog, we're all glorious, complete organisms made from the precise organization of trillions of cells in nearly constant activity. This ability of all living systems to maintain stable internal conditions no matter what changes are occurring outside the body is called homeostasis, and it's another major unifying theme in anatomy and physiology. Your survival is all about maintaining balance of both materials and energy. You need the right amount of blood, water, nutrients, and oxygen to create and disperse energy, as well as the perfect body temperature, the right blood pressure, efficient movement of waste through your body. All that needs to stay balanced. And by your survival depending on it, I mean that everyone's ultimate cause of death is the extreme and irreversible loss of homeostasis. Organ failure, hypothermia, suffocation, starvation, dehydration, they all lead to the same end by throwing off your internal balances that allow your body to keep processing energy. Take an extreme and sudden case. Your arm pops off. If nothing is done quickly to treat such a severe wound, you would bleed to death, right? But what does that really mean? What's going to happen? How do I die? Well, that arterial wound, if left untreated, will cause a drastic drop in blood pressure that in turn will prevent the delivery of oxygen throughout the body. So the real result of such an injury, the actual cause of death, is the loss of homeostasis. I mean, you can live a full and healthy life without an arm, but you can't live without blood pressure, because without blood, your cells don't get oxygen, and without oxygen, they can't process energy, and you die. With so many connected parts needed to make your life possible, you can see how we need a hyper-precise language to identify the parts of your body and communicate what's happening to them. A doctor isn't going to recommend a patient for surgery by telling the surgeon that the patient has an achy belly. They're going to need to give a detailed description. Essentially, it's like a verbal map. So over time, anatomy has developed its own standardized set of directional terms that describe where one body part is in relation to another. Imagine a person standing in front of you. This is what is called the classic anatomical position, where the body is erect and facing straight ahead with arms at the sides and palms forward. Now imagine slicing that person into different sections or planes. Don't imagine it too graphically, though. The sagittal plane comes down vertically and divides a body or organ in left and right parts. If you imagine a plane parallel to the sagittal plane, but off to one side, that plane is the parasagittal. The coronal or frontal plane splits everything vertically into front and back, and the transverse or horizontal plane divides the body top and bottom. Look at that body again, and you'll notice even more divisions, like the difference between the axial and appendicular parts. Everything in line with the center of the body, the head, neck, and trunk, are considered axial parts, while the arms and legs, or appendages, are the appendicular parts that attach to the body's axis. Everything in the front of your body is considered anterior or ventral, and everything in the back is posterior or dorsal. So your eyes are anterior and your butt is posterior. But you'd also say that your breastbone is anterior to or in front of the spine, and the heart is posterior to or behind the breastbone. Features toward the top of your body, like your head, are considered superior or cranial, while structures that are lower down are inferior or caudal. So the jaw is superior to the lungs because it's above them, while the pelvis is inferior to the stomach because it's below it. And there's more. If you imagine the center line running down the axis of a body, structures toward that midline are called medial, while those farther away from the midline are lateral. So the arms are lateral to the heart, and the heart is medial to the arms. Looking at the limbs, your appendicular parts of your body, you'd call the areas closer to the center of the trunk proximal, and those farther away distal. In anatomy talk, your knee is proximal to your ankle because it's closer to the axial line, while a wrist is distal to the elbow because it's farther from the center. Okay, pop quiz. I'm eating a club sandwich. I'm not. I wish I was. But imagine I am. I'm so ravenous and distracted that I forget to take out the little frilly toothpick at the top, and I end up swallowing it with a raft of turkey bacon and toast. A fragment of that toothpick gets lodged somewhere in here, and my doctor takes an x-ray and says I need surgery. Using anatomical language, how would she direct the surgeon to that tiny wooden stake inside of me? She might describe it as being along the medial line, posterior to the heart, but anterior to the vertebra, inferior to the collarbone, but superior to the stomach. That would give the surgeon a pretty good idea of where to look, in the esophagus, just above the stomach. I warned you at the beginning. A lot of terms, and all those terms might just save my life. And hey, it's the end of your first lesson, and you've already started to talk the talk. Today, you learned that anatomy studies the structure of body parts, while physiology describes how those parts come together to function. We also talked about some of these disciplines' central principles, including the complementarity of structure and function, the hierarchy of organization, and how the balance of materials and energy, known as homeostasis, is really what keeps you alive. And then we wrapped it all up with a primer on directional terms, all held together with a toothpick. Thank you for watching, especially to our Subbable subscribers who make Crash Course available not just to themselves, but also everyone else in the world. To find out how you can become a supporter, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Valerie Barr. The sound designer is Michael Aranda. And the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
I gotta make sure. I want to be good about showing those credits at the end because they deserve credit for all that awesome work. Okay, so that is a brief overview of basically everything related to the organization of the human body. It is a lot of terms, but let's go ahead and break those down a little more specifically. So, you know, if we're talking about like our body studies, this is kind of what we're looking at today. You know, three of the main biggest ones are going to be anatomy, physiology, and pathology, right? Anatomy being the study of what the body is. So it's our labeling system. Physiology being what the body does. It's our understanding of how we function. And pathology, which is the study of diseases. So how our body interacts with this world that we live in. And then we kind of organize when we are labeling things from simple to complex, right? So we're going to start with the most simple stuff and then build it up into the most complex. So, you know, in terms of organization, we've got chemicals, which come together to make up cells, which come together to make up tissues, which come together to make up organs. Organs make up systems. Systems make up peoples. So that's a big part of like what we do. Now, when it comes to understanding that, we want to understand like our structure, and we also want to understand like how we process and produce energy, like how we live basically, right? And so in order to understand our structure, we have body direction terms, right? Things like the anatomic position, which gives us a reference point so that when I say something is superior, you and I are speaking the same language. You know, superior is always referring to the anatomic position. Even if I were hanging upside down or leaning like this, you know, my head will always, always, always be superior because I'm referring to what it looks like when it's in the anatomic position. Whereas like my breastbone would be inferior no matter what, even if I was upside down. And that way we never get confused about our terms. There's always a standardized reference point. And those are our anatomic position and directional terms. We also have planes of motion, which is going to be a big part of our industry because typically, you know, exercises are going to exist in one plane of motion predominantly, but that's not how we live our lives, right? Like we live our lives in all planes of motion. So a lot of times what makes the difference between like an integrated program and a basic training program is an integrated program moves through all planes of motion, similar to how living your life moves through all planes of motion. Whereas like kind of a simple program really only focuses on like a lot of sagittal movements, bicep curls, tricep extensions, squats, lunges, running. You know, they don't do a lot of like frontal or transverse movements. So we're going to be kind of looking at those so we understand what they are. And then we will also talk a little bit about metabolism, where we need to understand like building up materials, breaking down materials to build up materials, and then how our body functions in terms of feedback. How does your body maintain the most important concept of today's lecture, homeostasis, right? Your body being able to maintain itself. So those are a lot of our key terms here. So we're going to kind of go through those. This first one being the term anatomy, right, which is going to be the study of what the body is, right? So it is, I'm sorry, the study of body structure. That is my definition, body structure. A big way to say this is it is the study of what the body is, or it's our way of labeling the body's structures, right? So this gives us a good way to understand our world, right? Like I always like to say this, but there's no such thing as a minute. Like there's no such thing as a second or a mile or a pound or a kilogram. Like none of those things actually exist. They're not tangible things that you can hold. But it's something that we all understand because we came up with a standardized version in order for us to be able to understand the world we live in, right? Like when I say 1 minute, you know that it's a unit of time and you know about how long it takes for that unit of time to pass. That is kind of similar to why we came up with things like anatomy, right? It's a way for us to be able to label things and understand them. My favorite example of this, and I love to say this because this is such a silly quote, but the only organ in your body that named itself is your brain. That's technically true. Like, you know, one day someone's brain was like, we should come up with a name for body parts. We'll call the one inside of our head the brain. And it's like their brain came up with that brain. So it's like brainception. So that is the study of anatomy. Now we also have physiology, right? Physiology is the study of body function. Or if you want to think about it, it's the study of what the body does. So, you know, my bones, like, let's just say like this is, you know, this is my humerus, right? That's what this bone is. But what it does is it gives my arm structure and it gives my muscles a lever to manipulate. So that's its physiology, right? So the anatomy is what bone it is, and the physiology is what it does. Also, it produces red blood cells and helps with my immune system. You know, there's a lot of physiologic functions that it has. So then we're going to look at our levels of organization, right? Like I said, we're going to go from small to big. I kind of actually ended up talking about this randomly yesterday, but the second law of thermodynamics is what's called like the law of entropy. And basically what it says is that like the universe likes to like eventually just decay stuff from very complex down to very simple if it is doing it passively. But if you use energy, you can build stuff from simple up into something complex. That's how our body is able to take like a chicken breast, break it down into amino acids, and then reform them into a new quadriceps cell. You know, and now suddenly we've got a little bit of extra muscle on our legs. So we took something very complex, we broke it down into something simple, and we built it back up into something more complex. That is basically what metabolism is. So in order to understand metabolism, we kind of have to understand like the directions in which stuff is moving. And so when we're looking at like the levels of organization, and we'll give this kind of a fake definition here. I know it's not actually in the PowerPoint, but the levels of organization describes how materials become organisms, right? And it's honestly a pretty simple version of it's a small version of like eventually what will kind of describe metabolism. So what's going to happen is like you have chemicals, right, in the form of like atoms, which will come together to form your cells. And then a group of cells will come together to form up like a body tissue. And then body tissues will come together to make up organs. And then those organs will work together to create like a system, right? So like, you know, your heart cells are very different from your lung cells. And so heart tissue is very different from lung tissue, and the heart is a very different organ from your lungs. But those two separate organs work together in a system called your cardiorespiratory system. So you have your cardiovascular system and you have your respiratory system, and when they work together, that's your cardiorespiratory system. They both have different functions, but they function together to create like an organism, right? So organs will come together to make up systems. and systems will come together to make up an organism, right? So this is going from most simple to most complex. You know, a chemical is pretty darn simple. It's just a little bit of hydrogen and carbon and oxygen and things like that. But then they all come together to make up these, you know, when they get millions and millions of chemicals all coming together to make up an individual cell, now you've got something that's a little more complex, almost like its own little critter living inside of your body. And then all those critters come together to make up those tissues. And eventually, like, that's going to make up you. I love talking about cells. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, actually. And you're going to hear, you know, we're going to watch another crash course video at one point that kind of uses the same analogy that I've always liked to use to describe cells, where cells are basically like little cities, you know? They're like little cities that exist inside of your body. They have a police force. They have a town hall where all the decisions get made. They have like an outer like perimeter, you know, they have all these things. They have an energy factory and they have houses, you know, all these like little things that you kind of see in like a town or a city, you know? And I always think that's kind of cool. And then like, if you think about it, they look like little small versions of you too. This is kind of an example of like how we are a reflection of this same style of organization, where we have like a digestive system and a power plant, and like we have like our, you know, we have our immune system going around policing and making sure that viruses and bacteria don't harm us. You know, it's kind of interesting when you look at stuff like that. And then I could go even bigger and be like, states or cities are like little states, and then states are like little countries, and countries are like little planets, and planets are like a solar system. It's really cool. It's one of my favorite stuff to talk about, but we are going to move on. So lots of the main systems in your body. Don't worry about putting these in your notes just yet. But we have what's called your integumentary system. That's your skin, right? Like that's your skin system, covers your whole body, largest organ in your body, actually. You get your skeletal system. That's going to be all of your bones and your joints, giving you body structure and levers. You get your muscular system, which is all the muscles that actually move your body around, probably what most of us came here to talk about. We get our nervous system, which is going to transport information, and your endocrine system, which is also kind of in charge of transporting information. But nervous system is like actual information that is used to control your body, whereas the endocrine system is a series of like juices and hormones that control your body. So they're both control systems, which is kind of fun. You've got your circulatory systems, like your lymphatic system, which moves fluid throughout your body, your cardiovascular system, which moves blood and oxygen throughout your body, your energy supply, which is your respiratory system, which is bringing in oxygen to keep your cells alive, your digestive system, which is converting food into chemicals to keep your cells alive, and your urinary system the end of your digestive system, which get rid of all of that. And then we got the most fun one to talk about, which is your reproductive system, which has nothing to do with training, so we're moving on. Everybody's favorite system. That is a general rundown of how we kind of organize everything. So, by the way, you're going to see these PowerPoints. There's fun little quizzes at the end of them. That is kind of fun, where it like breaks down. It's like, what system is comprised of this? These are kind of unique PowerPoints that actually come out of your Memler's textbook. So these PowerPoints weren't actually written by NASM, but the test questions were. It's kind of a fun. This is kind of a unique. That's another reason why I like this class. It's also just kind of unique compared to a lot of our other ones. So the next thing we need to talk about, once we understand this, like I said, the levels of organization are kind of similar to metabolism. They directly relate to how our body metabolizes things, right? So when I say that, we kind of need to understand what I mean when I say metabolism, right? So metabolism is going to be all life-sustaining reactions that occur within the body, right? And a good way to kind of think about it is that it's literally all chemical reactions that occur to keep the body up and running. That's an easy way to kind of think about it, right? Like your body can't do anything unless it is metabolizing things. So a lot of times when you think about metabolism, people are like, oh, it's how many calories you burn in a day. No, that's how we measure metabolism. Like if we need to like slap a number on your metabolic rate, we will describe it that way. But that's not necessarily like, that doesn't give us an understanding of how metabolism functions, right? Or sometimes you'll even hear people say like, oh, metabolism describes how quickly you get hungry. again, like that's part of your metabolism, like how quickly your body can break down a nutrient. You know, if it breaks it down really quickly, you're going to get hungry soon. If it breaks it down really slowly, you're going to get hungry later. So yes, that's related to your metabolism, but it's not what metabolism is. So metabolism is going to break down into two separate directions. By the way, you're going to start noticing as we go through this class especially, a classic in the world of studying anatomy and physiology and biology, which is we are constantly trying to get things down to two. We're constantly trying to get things down to two like instance or two like subjects, like one that goes that way and another one that goes that way. Science loves to break things down into opposites. So you are going to notice like we're going to see this a lot, starting right here with catabolism and anabolism, or catabolism and anabolism, depending on how you want to pronounce either of those. And basically, catabolic reactions are reactions that break stuff down, and anabolic reactions are reactions that build stuff up. One of the easiest ways to remember this is just to think about, like, you know, in our industry, people who are silly and decide to do anabolic steroids, and then they become giant humans, right? That's what anabolism does. It builds stuff up. We're going to break this down, right? So let's look at catabolism first. So catabolic reactions, or catabolism, are going to be reactions that break complex substances down into simpler compounds, right? So that's what we mean when we take something that's very, very complex and we break it down into something simple. You know, even the process of chewing is an example of a catabolic reaction. You took, you know, a cracker and broke it down into like mush. You know, it used to be really complicated. It had little salt granules around the outside. It had this like little frilly shape. Talking about like a Ritz cracker. And if you break it down now, it's just like a bunch of mush. And even those sugars are starting to break down, which is why if you hold it in your mouth a little longer, it'll actually start to taste sweet after a little while. And that is because you are catabolically breaking that cracker down into sugars. And eventually that cracker will get all the way broken down into sugars, proteins, and fats. And then it can get absorbed into your bloodstream. And your body can take those fats and be like, great, I'm going to build that up and make a new cell wall. And it can take that protein and be like, awesome, and I'm going to build that up and make a new enzyme. And then it's going to take those carbohydrates and be like, excellent, I can build that up into a bigger complex sugar, store it in the muscles, and use it for energy later. So that's what we mean with catabolism. But all three of those things that I just described, where we are building them up into either an enzyme or a cell wall or, you know, a stored sugar, all of that is an anabolic reaction. All of those things are building those simple ingredients up into something more complex. So catabolic reactions, like I said, they break stuff down into simpler complexes, right? It is a catabolic reactions are reactions that break stuff down, right? This is used to form one of our most important molecules, which is called ATP, which we'll be talking a lot about in later classes. We've also got anabolic reactions, or your anabolism, which are going to be reactions that build simple compounds into more complex substances. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put another note in catabolism here. An example of this would be like breaking breaking a chicken breast down into amino acids and fatty acids, right? So breaking that down. An anabolic reaction, reactions that build simple substances into more complex substances. So these are like anabolic reactions are reactions that build stuff up. That's the easiest way to think about it. So for example, taking amino acids and assembling them all together to make new muscle tissue. That's an example of an anabolic reaction. In fact, that's the example of everyone's favorite anabolic reaction. You know, that's the one we all go to the gym for. Those are sort of our two biggest parts of metabolism. So the thing is, whenever we're talking about metabolism, the reason we are doing this, the reason we're just talking about this so much right now is because our main role of our body is to maintain what is called homeostasis. And homeostasis is the body's internal balance, right? That's really what we're going for here. Our body is just trying to maintain balance, you know? And I'm just gonna go ahead and put a little sub note here in my own words, which is like, your body's main job is to sustain and is to maintain homeostasis by any means necessary. So if you have ever been on like a weight loss program and you've had trouble dropping a few pounds, or if you have ever been on like a weight gain program and you have had trouble building up muscle, you know, all of those are coming down to, you know, if you've had trouble with those things, the reason you've had trouble is because your body is trying to maintain homeostasis. Like when you are trying to tap into your body fat and lose some of that body fat, your body's going, whoa, 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 I don't want to lose it. I stored that for a reason so that we could have it for a rainy day, you know? And the same thing is true with muscle. When you try to build muscle, your body's going to go, no, 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 no. That means that we're going to burn more energy, and you only eat so many calories. So I'm not trying to burn more energy. You know, we only have a budget of so much. Your body resists changes. So we have to know how to push your body outside of homeostasis in order to result in change. And so one of the ways that we do that to build muscle, for instance, is we damage your muscle tissue by working out. And when you do that, when you create cellular damage, your body goes, what happened? Who destroyed my quads? And it goes, all right, if you're going to keep doing this lunging thing, I'm going to build more muscle so that we can maintain homeostasis. And so then in response, by exercising, it builds up new muscular tissue. And now you are bigger and more resistant to damage in the future, and therefore it's easy to maintain homeostasis. Even when your body has like a fever, right? That's an example of your body trying to maintain homeostasis. Your temperature is starting to climb like crazy to burn out any viruses, because those viruses don't function. They only function within a very narrow range of temperatures. So when we get outside of those temperature ranges, that virus starts to die. Unfortunately, a fever is an example of your body's like nuclear option, where it's like, you know, send in the nukes, and it's like, it kind of destroys all your good stuff too. But it's trying its best. Give the body some credit. In order to maintain homeostasis, we need to be able to kind of get back to our source, right? We always need to get back to wherever we started from. And so we've got two ways that we're going to do that. One of those things is going to be the main version of this that we're going to describe. Your body's main jobs is to make, what? No. Microsoft Word, you're wrong. Is going to be what's called negative feedback, okay? So negative feedback is a term that we use to kind of describe how your body gets back to an original source. So it describes how the body returns to a source, right? So for instance, like this reverses a condition back to a norm. I actually really like that. I'm gonna put that up here. It reverses a condition or status back to a norm. So let's say you walk outside, right? It's the middle of August, and it's 1,000,000 degrees out because we all live in Los Angeles. Sorry to complain. I'm from Oregon, so like I prefer the cold. And so you walk outside, and your body goes, "Woo! It is crazy hot out here, right?" Your temperature is starting to climb. You know. Both internally and externally. Yeah, you're being affected externally first, but it's raising your temperature internally. So your body is going to go, hey, like our enzymes, our bacteria, all of the normal stuff that our body does can't function at a super high temperature, right? We want to get to, you know, normal human body temperature, right? And so what it's going to do is it's going to have you start sweating in response. It's going to leak a little bit of fluid out of your skin. And then as air rushes past that fluid, that's going to create like evaporation, which is going to create a cooling effect. Meanwhile, your blood vessels have expanded and moved towards the surface of your skin. So now when that cold air rushes by, your blood cells are going to pick up some of that coldness and carry it throughout your body. And that's what happens, and that's why we sweat, is it's your body's version of negative feedback to get you back to normal body temperature. And the exact opposite is true as well. If you were to walk outside in Oregon and it were freezing cold out and you immediately start shivering like this, right? What's going to happen is first, before you start shivering, your body is going to create goosebumps, right? And so it's going to create like raised up bumps, which is going to evenly distribute the air. And then there's not as much cold air touching the same amount of surface area as before. Meanwhile, your blood vessels are going to constrict and they're going to move away from the surface. And that way, your blood can't carry all that cold air around the body as easily. And so blood flow is actually going to slow down in response. And eventually, if you get even colder, you'll start shivering, right? And that shivering is your body trying to move and create friction, which creates heat. And all of that is an example of negative feedback. Negative feedback is how we get back to a source. So here's the classic example, right? You've got your thermostat set to 70 degrees, but then you open the front door. This is definitely in Oregon. You open your front door, and so the whole house cools down a little bit in your body, and then your thermostat realizes it's not 66 degrees anymore. So the thermostat kicks the heater on, and now that temperature raises back to 70 degrees and gets back to its original source that you had it set at. That is an example of negative feedback. Here's another really good example, right? As your body temperature gets up, your body will do something to cool you down. As your body temperature closes down, it will try to get you back to normal. All of this is negative feedback. So if you intake food, for instance, and your blood sugar levels rise, your body will create, it will trigger your pancreas to release a hormone called insulin. And insulin will now start running through your bloodstream. And that insulin's job is to pull sugar out of your blood and either store it as glycogen or store it as fat or have your cells use it for energy. And so that way your sugar levels get back to a normal level. Again, all of that is an example of negative feedback. Now, there is a smaller response, which is also called positive feedback. And positive feedback, you would think would be the exact opposite. You think like negative feedback would be getting you back to a source, and positive feedback would be taking you away from that source. And that kind of is actually how it works. But positive feedback is definitely less common, but it's where it intensifies a response, right? And so if a condition doesn't have a strong enough effect, positive feedback will enhance that effect. So positive feedback is like if your body created insulin and then for some reason your cells just didn't uptake that insulin, and so the sugar levels remain high in your blood, your body will use positive feedback to make more insulin. And then it will eventually intensify that response, and then all of your blood sugar will get completely pulled out. And then the problem with that is that it creates super low blood sugar levels, and then that triggers hunger, and then we all overeat. This actually kind of explains why some people have such a hard time regulating their food intake, and why snacking is a big important part, especially with clients who are like diabetic, right? Diabetics are a classic example of somebody who has a very, very hard time managing their blood sugar levels because they are kind of victims of too much positive feedback thanks to ineffective negative feedback. So actually, I'm not going to put that here under homeostasis. I'm going to put that as a subnote under negative. So definitely less common. This is also an example of like why if you've ever lost your temper, it is sometimes hard to regain it because you're like, maybe the first effect wasn't intense enough, and then you were like, ugh, and then you got really amped up, and now there's all this like adrenaline and cortisol and all this other stuff, and you're like, it's fine, I'm over it. No, I'm not. Like, you are a victim of positive feedback. he said, being somebody who has a very bad road rage. So next thing we need to talk about are our directional terms. Maggie, you've definitely seen these before in our kinesiology class. Welcome back. So directional terms, right? So directional terms are a standardized set of terms used by, it's going to say healthcare professionals, but I'm going to say health and fitness professionals because we have co-opted them in order to describe body locations and movements. Okay, so our directional terms are really important because, again, they give us a standardized language to speak about, right? So I don't want to say bend your elbow, right? That's not a very good term because your elbow can bend in a lot of different ways. I mean, I know that it's primarily a hinge joint, but there is like a pivoting action that can happen there. Technically, when I say bend, do I mean bend it this way or do I mean bend it this way? Most people are probably going to think from going from a straight position to a bent position, but it's not guaranteed. So who's right? Well, really nobody. This is kind of a lose-lose scenario. So instead, we have the term flexion. And flexion will always, always, always describe decreasing an angle between two joints. So if I go from an angle like this, which would be 180 degrees, and I bend it to here, which would be 90 degrees, it went from 180 down to 90. Therefore, the angle decreased. Therefore, this is always flexion. And this is always extension, which is the opposite of flexion. And that is increasing the angle between a joint, right? So now when I say perform elbow flexion, you know exactly what I mean. I didn't say bend my elbow. I said perform elbow flexion. That's a very, very clear set of terms. There is no room for interpretation. It's always the same term. So we really like directional terms because they basically dummy proof, you know, how we use this language. They keep us from misinterpreting things, you know? I mean, if you want to know about like why it's so important to be clear and interpreting things, just look at like, you know, an example of how like the NASA was working with like other countries when creating like, I think it was the Mars rover, like the first one they made. And it was like millions of dollars lost because like one group programmed it in like inches or miles per hour, and then like another group programmed it in like kilometers per hour. And so like, you know, this lander was supposed to like land, you know, slowly on the Mars surface, and instead it just tried to plow straight through the planet. And that's because they didn't standardize things, right? They were using two different like interpretations. So we definitely don't want to do that when we are describing movements. Like if I want to teach you what a lunge is, we need to have very, very clear directional terms. So we're going to go through these really quick. They are going to be important, but they're definitely going to come back much more when we get to our kinesiology class, which kinesiology is like the study of human movement. And that's very specific to our industry. So I'm going to mention these now. You're going to hear me use these terms a lot, but they're going to be a very small part of this course. So our directional terms are going to be superior, which is going to be above a point above above a point of reference. Okay, so superior is above. Then we've also got inferior, which is exactly the opposite, which is going to be below a point of reference. Okay, then we are going to have anterior, which is going to be on the front, on or near the front. And then we've got posterior, which is on or near the back. That's so funny. My mom scarred me for life. When I was a kid, she never wanted to like threaten me in like ways around the other mothers that made her seem like too harsh. But she used to always say, you know, she's gonna beat me on my posterior. And that was her way of like not yelling and being like proper in society. But like little did she know I was gonna use the term posterior a whole bunch in my career and have like sweaty flashbacks for the rest of my life. But that is why we always refer to this as your posterior. It's the moneymaker. So then you got medial, which is going to be near the midline. Medial, which is nearer to the midline. Now I want to put a special note under this one. This only moves horizontally in fashion. So when we are describing medial, it moves like this. Okay, so if something is like if this is my midline, it moves closer in this direction. That's medial. And then lateral describes also only moving horizontally, and that moves away from your midline. So then we have lateral, which is farther from the midline. And again, this only moves horizontally. Okay, so medial and lateral are kind of like they're stuck on something like this, right? So like if I were to describe like one point here and another point up here, yeah, this is medial, but we're going to see another term in just a second, which is a little bit better to use. So that's medial and lateral. They move this way. Just like superior and inferior, actually, I should put this up here as well. Superior and inferior only move vertically, right? Ah. So those are those two terms. And then we have proximal and distal, which kind of screw everything up. These are the ones that always confuse people. Proximal is closer to the origin, and this can move in any direction, but it is commonly used in the arms and legs. And then we have distal, which is farther from the origin. And again, this can move in any direction, but we typically use it when we're talking about arms and legs. So medial and lateral move this way. Superior and inferior move this way, but proximal and distal can go in any direction. I just realized it's kind of like chess. But it's closer to the origin, right? And your origin is always closest to your midline when there's no reference point given. So if I describe like my forearm, right? I've got, the distal end here, which would be my wrist, and the proximal end here, which would be my elbow. And the reason that this is proximal and this is distal is because this is closer to my midline than this. If you were to like take a tape measure and measure how many inches it takes to get back to my center, this would maybe be 25 inches and this would be 31 inches, right? I have a 6-inch forearm apparently. By the way, for those of you who are new to this class, you are going to notice my math skills are not great. Biology teacher. I'm also going to spell stuff wrong a lot. Not an English teacher. So, Maggie's, you're like, yeah, these are true statements. So, those are all of our directional terms, right? And they're a very handy set of terms that we are going to use when we get to later classes. So again, superior is above, inferior is below, anterior is on the front, posterior is on the back, medial is towards the center, or towards the midline, lateral is towards the outer line. And then proximal and distal, distal is going away, proximal is going towards. It is close to an origin, whereas distal is far from an origin. And if we think of our origin, honestly, it's actually not your belly button, but if you want to think of it as your belly button, that's actually not a bad place to start. Okay, so now that we understand our directional terms, we also need to kind of have an understanding of our planes, right? So our planes of division are going to be 3 imaginary planes. Actually, we're going to call this planes of motion because that is totally the term that most people use. Our planes of motion are going to be 3 imaginary planes that bisect each other at right angles and divide and cut through the body in different directions. Okay, so the idea here is that you move predominantly along one plane at a time. Kind of think of it as like a puppet on a string, right? They can only move in like one direction or another, right? or like a car, like a race car on a racetrack. It can only move in one direction for the most part. So if I were being divided down the midline into a front half and a back half, right? Like if you were to cut me down like from here through my ear and then down like this and divide me, I would move along that plane kind of like this, right? This is what we call the frontal plane, which I know is very confusing considering that it moves side to side and not towards the front. Sorry for that. But it does divide you into front halves and back halves. So that's the frontal plane, right? Things like dumbbell lateral raises or like moving side to side like this, side shuffling, right? Those are all examples of frontal plane motions. Now, if you were to cut me down the midline like this, like straight through my eyes, down my nose, and through all the way and divide me into a left half and a right half, that would be what we call the sagittal plane. So I would move like this. A lot of exercises by default are sagittal plane motions. Walking, running, both of those are examples of sagittal planes. Bicep curls, tricep extensions, those are very sagittal movements. And then we have transverse movements. And transverse movements are going to cut you into upper and lower halves. So if you were to divide like a transverse line right here, like if you were to divide me through here, my neck can move along that plane this way, right? Or if you were to divide me here, my spine can divide into motions like this. Or if you divide my arm, it can rotate like this. Those are transverse movements, right? So these are rotational movements. And those are the three primary planes that we have. So we've got the frontal plane, which is going to divides the body into, and we'll use some terms from before, anterior and posterior halves, right? Examples of frontal plane movements. If you're thinking of the world of exercises, you can think of things like dumbbell lateral raises or side shuffling. Both of those are really good examples of frontal plane movements. And then we've also got sagittal plane movements. The sagittal plane is going to divide the body into left and right halves. Okay? Don't do that. Examples of sagittal are things like bicep curls or walking lunges, right? Those are really good examples there. As long as you don't lose your balance in that walking lunge, you're like, ugh, suddenly you do a little frontal movement. Then we got transverse movements, right? Transverse plane. And that's going to divide the body into upper and, actually we'll say superior and inferior halves, okay? Examples of sagittal, of transverse plane exercises are going to be things like Russian twists, wood chops, right? Things like that. Exercises where you are rotating. So here's our planes, right? You can kind of see pictures of these, right? Divided into front and back halves, sagittal plane divided into left and right halves, transverse plane being divided into upper and lower halves. All right, skipping past all that. Now, we are going to see some other terms, but honestly, they're not very specific to our world of personal training. So we're going to move through this kind of quick here. But these are where like body cavities become in. Oh, actually, you know what? Never mind. That is one thing. I got to go through these PowerPoints. I forgot there's a lot of junk slides in these PowerPoints where it's like, this is nothing, this is nothing, this is nothing. You will find at the end of the chapter, though, you'll see some information on like body cavity parts and stuff. Like you'll see like the term like dorsal. Those are terms and they are important, but they don't really get used in our realm. The only time we would ever maybe describe stuff like that is it's like where your digestive system houses your, you know, intestines and stuff. It's in your abdominal cavity. But we don't really use those terms very often. So they are in this chapter, But when you get through your planes of motion, if you're reading your chapters, you're good. You can stop right there. So that is pretty much it for day one. Hopefully it wasn't too much information. It is a lot of terms for sure. Like if you're a flashcard person, you get your work cut out for you after today. Yeah, wood chops is the right term. I'm just going to go ahead and respectfully disagree, Microsoft Word. So, so that is our day one notes. Maggie, do you have any questions?
No, it's
No,
all
I know these day ones are kind of, they're usually a little gentle. We try not to scare anybody off on the first day.
Yeah.
Nothing at all?
I have a couple of things for afterwards, but.
Fair enough. All right, so we're going to go ahead and end today's recording, and I will see all you all tomorrow. Where's my end recording button? See you guys.